It is important to pay notice when a generational athlete begins to communicate by smaller, more intentional decisions rather than through words.
Caitlin Clark could be sending a message to the Indiana Fever. Hey, I might not sign that epic. Y'all pushing everybody else for MVP. Stephanie White is having tantrums every time I shoot the ball. She's falling over herself on the sidelines. I don't have to deal with this. I can go elsewhere.
A message can reach a front office without a press conference or a public trade request. Sometimes all it takes to start a conversation is one pre-game appearance. Caitlin Clark took the court with a brand new purple version of her iconic Nike Caitlin 1 prior to Indiana's game versus the New York Liberty. Fans and analysts quickly began analyzing it to determine what was fact and what was interpretation.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. Caitlin Clark introducing the Statue of Liberty edition, the New York Liberty edition. I already know you damn near besties with Sabrina. We think you cool with Lexi. No, you go way back with Sabrina.
After previous releases in blue, yellow, and white, the purple pair was Clark's fourth colorway to be made public. There was no official comment from Clark, Nike, or the Fever organization linking the design to any information regarding her future on the team. What transpired was conjecture rather than proof, and it should be regarded as such. Nevertheless, the timing was sufficient to spark conversation, and it is worthwhile to examine why that response occurred in the first place and what it says about the larger tension around this Indiana squad. On its own, Clark's catchphrase has emerged as one of the sport's most carefully followed storylines this year. Nike has consistently released a series of hues associated with historic performances, team records, and high-profile games since the shoe's initial confirmation. Regardless of what is occurring in the standings, each one is producing its own wave of coverage. In light of this, a new pair making its premiere prior of a nationally televised game against New York was, on the surface, just the next step in a trend the shoe had already established. This context is important because it implies that the time of the publication did not need to be justified by any hidden purpose. It was in line with the release timetable that Clark and Nike had been using throughout the season. The ensuing conjecture sprang from the emotional state of a fanbase that was already ready to spot indications of dissatisfaction rather than anything out of the ordinary about the shoe itself. That reframes the story, so it's worth pondering for a little while. This intriguing article has nothing to do with shoes. It concerns what happens when a fanbase is prepared to read a standard product release as a subliminal message of discontent. Such reading does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs when a number of distinct, independent problems unrelated to footwear have already damaged supporters' trust in the organization they support. Fans who made the connections highlighted the event in a broader context. New York has a history of attracting elite players and putting together teams that are ready to win right away. When a star player from another location appears in a competing market wearing brand new gear in a color that some fans identify with the rival team, that conjecture ensued is not unexpected. Nothing in the public record indicates that it was deliberate messaging, and whether or not that reading has any significance is a different matter. What might with greater assurance, it is stated that the response itself reveals how supporters feel about the Indiana organization's current course, and that opinion did not emerge overnight. The theory's rapid dissemination after it emerged is also noteworthy. Clips and images of the sneaker were making the rounds on social media within hours of the game, frequently accompanied with remarks regarding coaching choices, roster construction, or the season's physical toll. The speed of that spread reveals more about the amount of pent-up commentary that was already searching for a way out than it does about the shoe. A fresh colorway would have been dismissed as what it was by a fanbase that thought its concerns were being addressed. An already irritated fanbase saw it as a handy emblem for all the other things it wished to convey. It helps to examine the choices being made by the roster managers in order to comprehend why a normal shoe reveal became a contentious issue. Throughout the season, his team's composition has consistently garnered criticism. Critics contend that the roster surrounding Clark has not been constructed to enhance her unique strengths and that draft assets and free agency choices have not been used effectively. The lineup has occasionally fallen into slower, more isolated possessions that make life easier for opposition defenses rather than around her with shooters and playmakers suited to a quick read and react approach. Not everyone agrees with that viewpoint. However, it is prevalent among fans and analysts who avidly follow the team, and it serves as the context for how every off-court story, including the introduction of a sneaker, is viewed. Proponents of the front officer's strategy would argue that it takes time to create a roster around a young core and that expecting a finished product at this early stage of Clark's career ignores the typical development curve that most competitive teams go through. They draw attention to the fact that other contenders have spent several seasons developing the rosters currently vying for titles, as well as the difficulties of adding proven veterans through free agency since the WNBA's pay Structure restricts what any one team can offer. That argument is persuasive, and it contributes to the fact that this is still a hotly debated topic among league fans rather than a definitive judgment on management. The counter-argument does not, however, make the frustration go away. Even while supporters are still voicing their concerns, it just clarifies where some of it might be misplaced. The irritation is not limited to roster construction, it also encompasses events that occur during actual games. Many fans anticipate a strong reaction from the head coach when Clark is forcibly defended at half-court, grabbed by the jersey, or thrown off balance without a whistle. A portion of the fanbase has criticized Stephanie White's behavior on the sidelines during these times, calling her responses overly restrained in light of the brutality aimed at her star player. Some disagree with such interpretation, claiming that a head coach picking conflicts with referees rarely affects results and can backfire by causing more technical fouls. Regular team watchers hold both opinions, and it's important to recognize that coaching temperament is one of the more subjective aspects of this discussion. The idea of a passive bench has undoubtedly been incorporated into the larger story that supporters have created about this season. In one version of this argument, White is given more credit than her detractors. Coaches who lose sight on the actual game plan and spend timeouts and sideline energy debating every missed call danger are not known for changing their minds just because a coach raised their voice. Even while White's public responses to physical play appear to be subtle on camera, some supporters who support her strategy cite her in-game changes and rotation management as proof that her focus is where it should be. Fans who are not quite satisfied with that defense wish to witness a coach actively defending a franchise player. However, it does cast doubt on the notion that being passive on the sidelines is a sign of disinterest rather than a purposeful, although questionable, coaching philosophy. Complaints over on-court chemistry reflect that same tension. A pattern of missed assignments, uneven screening, and space that does not always complement a fast-paced attack has been noted by several fans and analysts. Some members of the fanbase have criticized Aaliyah Boston in particular because they believe her chemistry with Clark has been uneven, whether it is due to screens that fail to completely close off defenders or possessions that stall in isolation rather than moving the ball. Once more, this is not a matter of definitive analysis but rather of interpretation and fan reaction. Furthermore, rational observers cannot agree on the extent to which this is due to coaching, personnel fit, or just the normal growing pains of a club that is still developing. When you combine this with a persistent dissatisfaction with injury reporting's lack of transparency, it becomes clearer why fans are inclined to interpret even seemingly insignificant details like shoe color. Here, too, it is worthwhile to add some balance. Boston has received recognition for her rebounding and post-scoring during certain parts of the season, and some experts contend that the chemistry problems supporters mention are more related to the coaching staff's spacing philosophy than to any personal shortcomings on her side. On many teams that eventually figure it out, early career friction is often caused by two players learning to play off each other at a high level, especially a ball-dominant guard and an interior scorer who also needs touches. It's precisely the kind of question that won't be resolved by a single game or season, whether Indiana's version of that friction resolves itself over time or calls for a more substantial change. Additionally, supporters on both sides of the argument might cite solid proof to support their claims. One of the season's most frequently discussed plotlines is the physicality aimed at Clark, in particular a trend in which defenders make prolonged contact with her away from the ball, employing positioning that verges on holding without officials calling it has been seen by fans and some members of the media. Videos of defenders around her with an arm at the perimeter or making contact that resembles football blocking rather than basketball defense without a whistle have gone viral. It is still up for dispute as to whether this represents a real officiating gap unique to Clark, a more widespread irregularity in the way physical play is called around the league, or just the typical fluctuation of missed calls that occurs to every player at some time. What is quantifiable is that analysts have frequently brought up Clark's free throw rate when attempting to balance the roughness depicted in game film with the calls that are actually made. The idea that Clark is the only player being singled out is complicated by the league office's own share of criticism regarding officiating consistency this season, which is not solely related to any one player. Numerous fan bases, coaches, and players have criticized referees throughout the league for having varied whistle standards from game to game. Although the specific concerns regarding the calls Clark receives or does not receive are not eliminated by this larger context, it does imply that the problem may be more about a systematic issue that the league has yet to resolve than it is about any one player. Before assuming any one theory explains what appears in the box score, viewers making inferences about intent, whether from referees or the league, should consider that larger trend. In light of this, New York is almost the exact opposite experience for a contemporary celebrity. With players like Breanna Stewart, Jonquel Jones, and Sabrina Ionescu playing distinct roles within a winning system, the Liberty have assembled a squad based on proven complementary talent. Now, supporters of both teams have observed the obvious friendship among Liberty players, and some have used Ionescu and Clark's mutual respect in public remarks as proof of a cordial connection between two of the league's most well-known guards. All of that doesn't constitute proof of anything more than what it seems to be. Two rivals who have mutual regard. It's important to distinguish between observation and supposition when interpreting a broader message, as some fans did after the introduction of the sneakers. It's also important to keep in mind that New York's current roster was not yet complete. Before the current bunch came together to become a title contender, the Liberty spent multiple off-seasons making thoughtful additions and taking in their fair share of criticism. Without taking into consideration the years of roster development that divide the two scenarios, comparing a still-developing Indiana group to an established New York club runs the risk of simplifying a more complex narrative. That does not negate the significance of the comparison. This suggests that the disparity between the two companies may reveal more about timeliness than ability. Additionally, instead of choosing the option that best suits their current frustration, supporters should consider both options simultaneously. However, when supposition arises from a genuine pattern of frustration, it is not unfounded. It is simpler to understand why supporters are ready to view everyday events like a shoe launch through the prism of dissatisfaction if the complaints about roster construction, coaching choices, and inconsistent officiating keep mounting without any discernible change. Professional sports and loyalty are reciprocal. Building competitive rosters and safeguarding their most expensive assets from both bad roster fit and unrestrained physical play on the court are expectations placed on front officers. Speculation often fills the void left by unresolved questions when a fan base believes that obligations are not being fulfilled. Here, history also provides some insight. Stars in other sports have shown their dissatisfaction with their organizations in even more blatant ways than a shoe colorway. From direct remarks in post-game interviews to trade requests submitted via agents. None of that has been done by Clark. She has persisted in publicly discussing her dedication to Indiana and the Fever. The level of annoyance that fans have projected into her shoes has not been reflected in any of her public remarks this season. It is important to address the discrepancy between what fans want to think and what the player has actually said, since it is simple for a strong hypothesis to outweigh the data, particularly when the theory neatly aligns with fans' pre-existing sentiments. All of this does not imply that Clark's purple Caitlin ones were a secret message intended for Indiana's front desk. That interpretation is not supported by any comment, interview, or verified reporting, and it should be regarded as fan conjecture rather than reality. The scenario does represent the current atmosphere surrounding the Fever, with a fan base intently monitoring roster moves, challenging coaching decisions under duress, and becoming more outspoken about what they see as a discrepancy in the way aggressive play against their hero is refereed. Nobody can say with certainty whether that sentiment will transfer into anything other than irritated criticism. All that can be said is that the organization has a season's worth of unanswered questions. And for an organization centered around one of the sport's most marketable athletes, every little unrelated event, like a new pair of shoes, is now viewed in that context. That dynamic is quite important. Sponsorship discussions, media attention, and ultimately the type of free agents ready to go on to play with a star are all influenced by public perception. This season, a front management does not have to address every grievance voiced by supporters. However, there are long-term costs associated with ignoring a pattern of persistent grievances regarding roster fit, coaching's reaction to physical play, and injury disclosure. The fact that so many people were willing to read a message into a shoe colorway, regardless of whether it was intended to convey anything at all, speaks much about the current state of trust between this fan base and this front office.